Hi, everybody, and welcome to a new show with Dr. James Yoghadi Weldon, and he's a spiritualist teacher and many things. A world-class traveler. He's written several books, Secret Journey to the Enlightened Mind, and he's got a retreat that he works with, Heavenly Mountain Retreat Center in North Carolina, and it's the oldest mountain range around, and I guess that's part of the Appalachian range. And he's written a book detailing his experiences and challenges and all the ups and downs in living an enlightened life. Dr. James Yoghadi Weldon shares his visceral adventure story of his life and many believes and achievements the next step of human evolution. At 5 years old, Dr. Weldon had a PTSD flashback, a terrible death, his last life Tibet in 1949. This was a flashback when he had a dream that he was in Tibet, and this is what started his spiritual journey. He was born in the Air Force. He was born to an Air Force hero and founder of the Nassau space industry in 1950. So this is where Dr. Weldon gets some of his smarts. I guess the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. His experiences and his training and enlightenment and his teachings and his travels through India and other parts of the country and the world in order to obtain all these different teachings. And he'll talk about his book about Jesus Christ, who did the same thing, and we'll get into that a little later with him. And he was a naturopathic doctor before this. He still is. I guess he's still practicing somewhat, but he's into the spiritualism, and he's got a lot to say about what goes on in the mind, in the consciousness, and also the meditation. So we'll be talking about how he can tell us and give us some notes on how to deal with the present situation with all this depression and all this worldly chaos. And like I said, this is the Dave Emmons Show. We are also syndicating through WODY Radio, and that's in Maryland, and that's the Odyssey Radio Live.com. You can go to that and see the audio portion of the show, and we will have the video and audio portion up on social media. And Dr. James Weldon, nice to have you back again. And actually, you're co-host instead of just a host. I know I say that you're the guest today, but actually you're a co-host because we've done several shows together, and you kind of do the things that actually help me coordinate the hosting duties. So, Dr. James Yoghadi Weldon, what do you have to say?
Well, hello to everyone. Whether you're listening to this now or 100 years from now, possibly, there are great correlations between this technology that you're listening through and higher states of consciousness. You know, it's no longer amazing that we can send our voice out anywhere in the world. We can send our video out anywhere in the world. We can see as if we had eyes virtually anywhere. We can look at any books through the computer medium. And we can get a sense of what's going on elsewhere through the sound and video. You know, the advanced states of consciousness are like that. And the mind has the ability to connect to those levels of life where the seeing and the hearing is true. And intuition capabilities, the ability to know things and see things, need to be validated, and it takes some time to develop that. You know, our life is very big and quite long. If we had any idea, you know, how long we've been around and we've been doing this, it would dumbfound and surprise every single one of us. Because the universe as a whole, you know, is 13 point something billion years. And our 100 years is just a little piece of that. So to make sense of what's going on in life in general, we have to recognize that there's really a lot more that we do not know. And, you know, my search has been about how to verify that and prove that. And I'm not interested in making things up. I'm not interested in fantasizing that I'm, you know, connecting with subtle beings or cosmic forces or higher states of consciousness.
Could you explain subtle beings, Dr. Weldon?
Well, we have an electromagnetic field around us. We can't see it, right?
Right.
If we could see there was a neat movie some years ago about a lady that gained the ability to be able to see some of those things. And she could see the electromagnetic field and begin to be able to, hear the telephone calls and so forth. It was an interesting movie because it correlated with really what is happening. We're young in the history of this thing. Even, human beings, if they've been around, a million years, a couple million years, even that is a short period of time. And just like we have an individual period in our life where we come into this world at some point, and very quickly, most people completely forget that, 10 minutes ago, let's say when you were born, you were in that subtle level of life, that vibratory, that energetic subtle level of life.
Right. We have
And
visions. Sometimes we have visions of our past lives. There's actually a science involved in that. And you get into that yourself. And that's what happened to you when you first started the spiritual journey. I heard scientists say that we could be as old as 350 million years old on this earth. We've been here and gone, back and forth, back and forth. And that's why a lot of people have these dreams that they've been somewhere else, some other time in place, in a deja vu or some kind of a dream or a vision, and which is very important to all of our mythology.
that is happening more and more in the world because the world as a whole is growing up. There are trillions of cells in your body, but what is actually communicating here is just a few cells which are able to link to the whole of your body and consciousness in the center of your pineal pituitary gland area. That's what's aware, and the rest of your body just does your actions spontaneously. You say, lift my hand, and it comes up. So we can be connected to the bigger life, and that is the growth phase that we're here going through in the world.
I know that
And
you teach spiritualism, but you also last week taught me a little bit about breathing exercises. And actually, it helped me kind of cough up my throat. I had the V, I don't want to say the words, but I had that symptomatic type of V.
right.
So it is kind of like a COVID cold, and I still kind of have it. But you taught me some breathing exercises. You get into, I guess, some sort of yoga exercise. You get into consciousness. You get into spirituality. Could you tell us all that you teach? This is very important to people out there.
So in the same way that there's a technology here which enables us to communicate, you don't really know how it works, but if you go through the process of, entering my name and sending me a link as you did, then we can connect. So there's a technology in consciousness, and it's the oldest knowledge really that there is. This is being done many thousands of years ago, possibly millions of years ago. And there are multiple levels and layers to the universe. There's subtler levels. So our breathing is very important. It's the first thing we do when we come into this world, and it will be absolutely the last thing we do before we exit. And when you connect with people that have had some of these out-of-body experiences, hopefully not through a major trauma, but have been able to pass and really clearly into that space, virtually all of them that really do it clearly, this tunnel you pass down, and when you pass out of this world, sometimes it's seen that way by a tunnel of light. The joy becomes superhuman. And all of the people that go through that and experience it clearly, many cases, they don't want to come back. This is what happened to Jesus,
Yeah.
when he was crucified.
Right.
He went out into that place and met with the father figure, really his spiritual teacher, who had been embodied in subtle also. And he was given a choice whether he wanted to come back or not. And he hadn't completed his journey. He hadn't completed his spiritual achievement and goals in his life. And actually the whole period of what was described in the Bible is only a couple of years of his life. He was missing from childhood, and he came back, from about 13. He left the area that he was born in, and he didn't come back for about 30 years. And then there was just 2.5 years. Then he went back to where he learned so much and spent the rest of his life. That's part of the story that I tell in my second book. And you can really see those things. So you wouldn't feel surprised if I was able to type something in my computer screen, whatever it is, any word, and it comes up on the computer screen. So when consciousness advances, then you can do that as well. And as we grow into it, it becomes more and more accurate. And the reason that so many people may have these in dream states is because there's a transition between waking, dreaming, and sleeping. There's another state of consciousness known as turiya, or super consciousness.
Yeah, and that second book was Secret Journey to the Enlightened Mind. Is that right?
Well, that was my first book
Okay.
that I wrote,
Living the
which
Enlightened Life is your other one. Okay. But those takes you to what you just talked about, Jesus and the consciousness. And consciousness now, they're saying, and a lot of scientists are saying, that extraterrestrials won't come and visit us and talk to us until we raise our consciousness level. Could you tell us about that?
yeah, it would be the same thing if you just imagine a being that might be millions of years old and remembers all those, whether he's been through multiple bodies. We have a number of bodies. We actually have, five major physical subtle bodies, but most people only experience this one clearly as our physical body, our earth body. But the life force body is the next one, and it's kind of like water. And when you pass into that realm, you gain the ability to move with the speed of the mind, and you can go places and see things. Now, whether those things are 5% accurate, and a lot of confusion and delusion gets in that area sometimes, or they're completely accurate, depends upon your spiritual growth. So if there are beings like this, and there are physical subtle beings and also physical beings, which people are talking about as aliens, you can connect with those. And just like you wouldn't go into the middle of a forest and, start talking to an ant nest or, a bee nest, because the bees don't have the ability to really communicate. And most of them communicate these subtle levels of life through these higher states of consciousness. What actually happens is the minds become linked. And then you see, hear, say, all the senses can be involved. Sometimes they're partial, but sometimes people slip into these states between waking, dreaming, and sleeping, and they will see things. Now, dream analysis is often inaccurate because there's a lot of other garbage in the mind. If your mind was completely free and clear of all the deep impressions, you would rise up in absolute bliss right now. You would be absolutely, tears would be running down your face if you couldn't possibly imagine how great and wonderful that is.
Right.
So,
Dr. James, you mentioned something about dreams, and I thought this would be I kind of talked to you off the air about this. There's dreams, there's visions, uh, and there's mythology. How does that, like, it started way back before Enoch, no doubt. That's where I've been studying for this book that I'm doing now, Angels and Watchers. And I know the book that you're doing on Jesus, you've already done a lot of research and study on that. But with me, I'm finding out some new stuff. Is like dreams and visions, and this type of thing has been all throughout history, and the prophets all had visions. What makes that
absolutely.
difference from our visions and dreams of today?
Well, I mean, we do have helpers that guide our life. We do have family that may have passed, may have been with us before. And there is a realm where you can connect with them. And this is usually what happens when people pass out of the body. They die on the operating table. If they have an accident and they're thrown out of the body, sometimes they will be able to move into that place. But waking, dreaming, and sleeping, there's a state called turiya. It's super consciousness. It's not really a decision-making space. It's a pure witnessing state. And you can see things that you wouldn't normally see. Actually, honestly, these days, I'm passing through a place in my own evolution, because it continues, where most of the things that I see and hear, even TV programs, movies, I go into the movie and I turn to my wife and I say, wait a minute, I saw this movie before. Now, I don't remember going to the movie, but I remember the scenes. So what happens is the consciousness really was able to, it's outside of time and space. Your essence is like your space. We're a bubble of space in the infinite sense. And what can you do to the space? And so what happens in some of these advanced states is you're able to kind of peek out around the bubble and you can have intuitions. This happened to me from childhood. I was 4 or 5 years old. And I was able to get into some of those deep memories. That's why I was having flashbacks. So Tibet, 4 or 5 years. I didn't know it was Tibet. I didn't know that word. And meditation, I was doing some of that in meditation, even though I'd never been taught meditation. I would sit in silence. So the deeper mind is wiser. And when we come into this world, it's kind of wiped. So the feelings and the emotions are often there from the past, but not the individual events.
I
But
had a
everything
Facebook follower,
that
Dr.
happened to us is in there if you access that. And it can help verify if you need that, but it's not a requirement.
Right.
And it's not necessarily always beneficial because the past is the lesser evolved state. So if you go back into that stuff, you were generally lesser developed spiritually, consciousness wise than you are now. And
Yeah,
so
I had a Facebook follower, Dr. James. He asked a very interesting question. He mentioned three movies: Star Trek, Star Wars, and also The Third Kind. And these were all, of course, ET UFO type movies. And he said, how did they know some of this information? Well, I've heard from other people who's been around the cabal and actually been screenplay writers. I got a friend that I've interviewed him before, and they claim that sometimes there's time travelers who come back and talk to these producers and tell them about what some of this stuff looks like in the future. Also, we can't ignore the fact that military sometimes know these big rich producers, the billionaires or millionaires. They know them and they give them inside information about these types of movies. So is that very possible, either time travel or military intelligence?
sure, of course. So think of it in the sense that you've got this giant hard drive on your computer. You don't access all the information in that hard drive all the time.
Right.
And there may be deep secrets in there, but sometimes through the proper techniques, proper meditation, proper practices, these things are extremely valuable, you can begin to get access to that. In my case, when I was 4 or 5 years old, I had PTSD. I had nightmares of being imprisoned in a place, and I would take cigarettes of my father. I didn't smoke, but I like to see the smoke go through the air. I didn't know incense. There was no meditation in the West at that time. There's no yoga when I started. There was none of this. Yoga, by the way, is not just the stretching of the body. Yoga actually means unity between your individual being and the cosmic reality. That's what yoga is. And so when that unity becomes deeper, and it's something that you gradually grow into, and there are practices that can enhance that, breathing techniques, meditation techniques,
Right.
Singing, song, all of that can significantly enhance that. This facility behind me is the home of the Art of Living Retreat Center, and it's the largest NGO, all volunteer charitable organization in the world. And it's a giant, giant facility. And I live here and study with that and support the teacher of that, who I consider as the greatest spiritual teacher right now embodied in the world. His name is Sri Sri Ravi Shankar. He's the best known spiritual teacher in Asia, in India, with tens of millions of people involved in his program. But he does all kinds of good things in the world, all kinds of projects. It's just he's on a world tour now, and basically helping people stand up for peace. So we got to make people peaceful. We can't talk about it. We can talk here forever, but
Right.
ultimately it's going to come down to, what are you ready to do to expand your individual awareness and take the steps to make yourself a deeper, more peaceful, more profound, more loving individual.
I guess that's why we get tired of the mainstream media. They always come up with problems. They always come up with the situations that are going on, but nobody ever comes up with actual solutions. And I know the politicians have these, it's whoever stuffs money in their back pocket is where the solutions come from.
Well, people are attracted more so to negativity. If you do a long talk on so many people born at the local hospital here, and everybody was overjoyed with love, and tears are running down their face when the new baby comes into the world. That's not news. So what they do is, because of the nature of the media, they collect, in many cases, some of the most terrible things that are happening in the world. And if you spend all your time looking at that, it influences you. And so you need to be a little careful about what you expose yourself to. Now, one of the most important things in your growth is to have connections with high-minded individuals that are living these higher states. And the founder or teacher comes here every year, a couple of times, and did a tour around the United States. And he went down to South America. He went to all these cities, everywhere he went, there's a huge group. And, I'm an early student of his, as far as I know. I'm the first one in the world. I met him at 76. But he was a young boy. He was a student at that time for the individual that inspired the Beatles to do all their love music, and they traveled to India and learned to meditate.
Right.
And I'm a graduate of their university out in Iowa. Got a couple degrees. So I'm always interested in improving my education. So proper spiritual education and being around and in and together with community of high-minded beings is very important. One way you could think about this is that beings like this are like a giant electromagnet of spirituality, and having the chance to be around them and with them. You get so much through the video.
Mm-hmm.
You can pick any topic imaginable, anything, depression, and do a search under Art of Living Depression. And there are tons of videos that will help you not be more depressed, worried, and anxious. So this negativity sticks onto us. It's kind of like if you jump in a septic tank, you'll come out full of stuff. It'll be nasty for a while. Yeah. So every day we're jumping into that septic tank a little bit, and we don't understand how to wash and clean our mind. So we shower every day. Every day I get up and I take a shower as soon as I wake up, wash my hair, comb things out, brush my teeth, but we don't really clean our mind. We don't wash our mind. So there are methods, very powerful methods. And that's what I showed you, some of those breathing techniques to blast and start moving some of the stress that's stuck in your body.
Yeah, well, maybe we can do a show on that. You mentioned India, and I know you got some really good information on Christ in India and everything in your book. We'll do that in the second segment.
Sure.
This is going to be an our segment. But I had a friend in Alaska. He was a professor, and he was a senior professor, and he's very sharp, and he was Eastern Indian, and him and I become buddies. He's actually my landlord, because we leased property there for a couple of years while we stayed there. But I went to some Rotary meetings with him a couple of times with other professors. I had him in the car and I asked him, and maybe you might be able to explain this. He is Brahma, the religion of Brahma from India. And I asked him, I said, do you believe in God, Professor? I won't say his name, but I asked him, do you believe in God? He looks at me and he goes, no. There is no God. So is this how Brahma teaches this thing about
the philosophies of India? There is no such thing as Hinduism. Just imagine if there was a high spiritual being, an enlightened being that had come up in virtually every town in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So every one of those individuals that are living that high blissful state would have some different methods that they discovered made their life grow. And they would teach in different ways, but essentially they're talking about the same thing. Truthfully, in the realm of what is real and true, every idea is on the way. And the reality we pass into, the infinity, the immortality that we pass into, is beyond all thoughts and concepts and ideas. So there are, Buddha, by the way, wouldn't talk about God. He didn't argue about God because everybody thought that they knew everything. Okay.
And heaven is the only thing they had to explain themselves to, right?
Well, our idea of heaven is, Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is within you. What does that really mean? What does that mean? Does that mean that I've got a house with a building within me? No, that means that there's a place, an experiential place, which is beyond all imagination, all philosophy, all concept. And so in India, there are many different philosophies, and some of them say the Buddhists don't talk about God.
Right.
They don't, or they originally didn't. And Buddhism wasn't a separate practice. And this all happened later. Just like Jesus never heard of Christianity, ever.
Right.
Nobody ever thought of that, nor did he have an intent to create that. And so when these great beings come into the world, and there have been many of them over time, and they have different levels of attainment. If the universe is limitless and consciousness really is infinite and limitless, the growth into that also is limitless.
Right.
So there are subtle beings that are very well established in these cosmic realms. We can talk to them about as angels, as devas, and so forth. Now, the idea of that is not that object. So thinking about that isn't the reality of these high beings. And you were just telling me earlier before we came on, many of these people that have some of these out-of-body experiences through accidents, or they die on the operating table or whatever. Most of it is just brilliant light, right?
Right.
Brilliant consciousness. It's really conscious that they're moving into this cosmic state of awareness, which is what Jesus was seeking, by the way. And the reason he came back after being crucified, he wanted to establish himself in that christened consciousness, which is what he was shown during those few years by his teacher, what he was living at that time. He wanted to fully establish that.
Right. In my studies in the book that I'm coming out with, The Angels and Watches, I won't be done for another month or two, but I've been finding out a lot of interesting things that makes connections to the modern day ETs, angels, invisible beings, entities. And also in India, they mentioned devas as being the good. They don't really call them angels, and then they call the asuras. They're the bad ones, and they're actually born from an earthly father, and they eat and drink, in which most angels don't.
Well, those are concepts in India, and there can be subtle beings that are angelic, and there are human beings which are incarnated high beings, you could say.
Right.
They're avatar beings that are immortal, already attained.
Oh, that's the question I want. I'm glad you brought that up.
They come back in.
Yeah, I saw that in my studies, avatar. And what did they mean by that, avatar?
Well, there are many that it means what you think it means. You can say any word and you go to 100 people and they'll have a different meaning. So the meaning is different, but there are high beings, you could say, that have attained their very deep and profound oneness with the infinity. And they've decided to come back and have a play, do some good works. And so from time to time, these great beings come back in, and they're the leaders of the great spiritual movement.
Yeah, we'll have to get back into that subject in our second segment, Dr. Weldon. We're going to take a short pause, and we're going to mention WODY Radio, and that is Odyssey Radio live.com. This is the Dave Emmons Show, and I have Dr. James Yoghadi Weldon. And Yoghadi, he got his name by studying spiritualism under some great teachers. We'll be
actually, I was given that name by a cosmic force.
Cosmic work. Also, okay,
cosmic being, actually.
yeah,
I was given
that's
the name.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll talk about that. We're going to take a short pause. Be right back with you, and